Welcome. I am so happy to be here today with one of my favorite authors and good friends, David Kopacz, who is the author of a new book coming out soon, Caring for Self and Others, Transforming Burnout, Compassion Fatigue, and Soul Loss. Welcome, Dave.
Oh, thanks, Shelley. It's so nice to see you and so great working with you.
Well, this project has been going on, it feels like, in a way, since we first met back in 2014 when your
Mm.
first book, Re-humanizing Medicine, first came out. So, why don't we just start with telling us, our listeners, the journey that you had from rehumanizing medicine to here we are in 2024, 10 years later, with caring for self and others.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I do feel like this book is kind of a sequel to Rehumanizing Medicine. Rehumanizing Medicine, I felt obligated after studying holistic and integrative medicine for a while. I felt obligated to kind of put out this counter curriculum, is what I called it, a counter curriculum of rehumanization to try to re-inject humanity and cultivating our full humanity or cultivating being fully human into the healthcare and medical education and process and practice. So after I published that book, then I realized, well, it was still kind of theoretical. I was still talking at kind of this theoretical level, and what was the practical way that people would implement rehumanizing medicine? And I had some, exercises in rehumanizing medicine, but I started pretty early on with this idea of caring for self and others and doing workshops based on the book where I kind of built out for each of the different dimensions of being fully human, built out these different exercises and practical ways of working with those domains.
Well, caring for self and others in itself is a powerful title because it just encompasses so much about the importance of self care. But then we look at the subtitle and it's transforming burnout, compassion fatigue, and soul loss. And each of those, you can go and you do with the book, do a deeper dive into that. But since you wrote Rehumanizing Medicine, and then you were working on this book, we had this global pandemic,
Mhm.
and it feels like more important than ever that healthcare workers, physicians, nurses, educators need that way of transforming their own burnout since then. So how does this book fit into the world today?
Yeah, so I also felt with caring for self and others, it was this thing that I'd kind of developed and, it felt like it just hadn't taken root. And again, I felt this sense of obligation when the pandemic came around. I was like, I just really need to get that book out there because people are struggling so much with burnout now. And I think one of the things that changed during the pandemic is burnout went from something that some people were feeling some of the time to something that most people were feeling most of the time, you know. So it became just a lot more front and center. And yeah, I've got that subtitle then of with burnout, because when I talk with people about burnout, sometimes they'd say, well, that's not burnout, that's compassion fatigue. And then they'd say, well, that's not compassion fatigue, that's this, that, or the other thing. So I developed this idea of the costs of caring. And so burnout, compassion fatigue, and then this idea of soul loss are all things that fall under this umbrella of kind of occupational hazards of being in the caring profession. Things that can happen to you when you're caring, ways that your caring can need to be retuned and rejuvenated over time.
And to say a little bit more about soul loss, because that isn't something that we see in the literature on burnout. It's not an
Right.
academic term. That's
No,
what's so
no.
great about your book. It really
Mm,
differentiates it from other books, it seems like, too.
yeah. Also during those 10 years, I started working with Joseph Rael, Beautiful Painted Arrow, who's a Southern Ute elder who grew up at Pickery's Pueblo. And through a series of just kind of somewhat chance events, he and I started writing books together and have now written 4 books together. And so working with him from an indigenous perspective, the idea of soul loss is a really easy, it's practical. From medicine, Western medicine, it seems esoteric, but from an indigenous perspective, it's practical and common sense. And And so I started thinking too, with burnout, what is it that burns out? We've got this word that makes it sound like there was a flame, a fire, and then it's gone. And but what is it that actually burns out? And so I thought, well, it could be the soul. It could be that we lose connection with our soul, that the soul's kind of like a pilot light for the body, and not necessarily in a religious sense, maybe in a metaphysical sense, or maybe just in a metaphorical or psychological sense, that the soul is the part of us that is the pilot light. It's that thing that helps us feel vital, alive, interested in things, passionate in things. And when we lose that, then we're just going through the motions. And that also fits, the soul loss idea fits with the idea of dehumanization, of what happens when we go through a process of education or a practice of a professional domain, and we feel dehumanized, or people going through it feel dehumanized. What is it exactly that is missing? What is the human thing, that human spark? And I think, again, we could say, that it could be soul. It could be, if you're connected, if a doctor, let's say, for instance, is connected to their own soul, they're going to bring passion, caring, presence, and they're going to be present with that person who's suffering. And the person who's suffering is going to feel all these things. And these are things that are independent of the technical interventions, independent of the intellectual protocols that people are following. It's more a matter of humanity. Carl Jung said in uh, Modern Man in Search of Soul, when he was talking about psychotherapy, he said that something I'll paraphrase, that the technical degrees aren't the important thing. What's most important is the humanity. And so, in talking about psychotherapy, he's saying, if you don't bring your full humanity, you're not really doing a thorough, holistic psychotherapy. You're just being a technician.
Well, you use the word compassion in there, and in your book, you write about a compassion revolution. Say a little bit more about what your hopes are for that.
As I started, this was back in Rehumanizing Medicine, as I was looking at this, if we start with the problem, looking at contemporary medicine, and we say, there's a problem here. What is this problem? And one way of defining that problem is there's a lack of compassion, that practitioners have a lack of compassion. They feel a lack of compassion towards themselves in the system, and then patients feel a lack of compassion from practitioners in the system. So I started thinking about, as I was reading, other people who were, defining the problem in similar ways. Sometimes people would use different terms or different words, but people looking at medicine and trying to figure out, well, what's wrong here? And the idea of a compassion revolution, again, I'm kind of a holistic thinker, and Darwin talks about lumpers and splitters. So I'm more of a lumper. I look at things and I see how they're similar and try and lump them together, versus people who are more reductionistic or trying to separate everything out and have them as split from each other. And so I was like, there's a whole bunch of people doing the same thing, but what is it that we're doing? And we've all got different words and different terms for it, and different catchphrases that work for us. But what is this larger umbrella? So I thought the larger umbrella is the compassion revolution. And I was reading people doing this in medicine, education. Parker Palmer's been doing this for years in education, also branched out into healthcare, and also in business. I started coming across people in business world saying we need to attend to the whole person of our employee if we want to get the most out of them.
You just mentioned the great word whole, the whole person, and wholeness is part of what you're talking about with over transforming and finding your wholeness again after burnout. And in your book, you put it in terms of the 10 dimensions of being fully human. And that is how the book is laid out with each of our chapters. Talk a little bit about more where that concept came from and how that's going to help the readers of Caring for Self and Others.
Sure. So when I thought about, in Rehumanizing Medicine, if people are experiencing healthcare as dehumanizing, whether you're on the provider side or the patient side, if you're feeling dehumanized in going through the healthcare system, what would it mean? What is lost? And what would it mean to be fully human? What would it mean to be rehumanized? So, it seemed like I wasn't writing poetry, although I put some poetry in the book, in these books. Um, in poetry, you could just say, we're going from the dehumanization, and then we'd have a bunch of images of the phoenix and spring flowers sprouting and all these different things. And at the end of the poem, you'd be rehumanized. But for professionals, we need some sort of cognitive framework, some sort of intellectual framework for what it is that we're working on. So I looked at a few different models, and there's, mind, body, spirit is one kind of model. There's the biopsychosocial model in medicine, the biopsychosocial spiritual model. And it seemed like those were good, but it felt like there was more to it than that. And eventually I came to just rely on the chakra system from yoga philosophy of looking at body, emotions, and mind. Those are, our common things that we relate to in the West. And then heart, where we move from kind of the ego to a step more towards the interpersonal or transpersonal. And then creative self-expression, intuition, and the connection to spirit. And so for a while, I was using those seven dimensions. And then I had a medical student, after I gave a lecture, a medical student who was also an anthropologist came up and said, well, what about the social? And what about the relational? I was like, gosh, yeah, I missed that. Somehow in the yoga system, it's very much focused on the individual. The individual could connect through the body, through the emotions, through the mind, the heart to other people. So then I thought, well, I better add something that's relational. So I thought about context, which could include physical surroundings, emotional surroundings, culture, society, interpersonal relationships. And then I thought eight didn't feel completely balanced. So then I thought, well, how about time? Let's add time in there too, because I started thinking as I was giving advice to people, I thought, well, for myself, at the point in my career I was without having kids, I could just change jobs. But if I was a single parent with kids, that's going to look different for me as far as what my options are. I can't just go out and start a private practice if I've got, family obligations too. It would be much more risky undertaking. So that made me think, well, over time, we're changing as well. And then in caring for self and others, we added that 10th kind of domain, which was leading caring. We're kind of coming full circle of that idea then of wrapping all these 9 different dimensions together into one dimension that then you're working from in leading caring for yourself, leading caring for others, and also if you're in a leadership position, supporting everybody in the system to have this culture of caring develop.
So for each chapter, you have chosen 3 words which are action words, verbs. For instance, with the chapter about the dimension of your body, the 3 concepts that you explore are embodying, animating, and nourishing. And I love that all of the words in your book start with or end with that ing verbing. So tell us more about what the verbing is.
Yeah, so the verbing was from working with Joseph Rael. Joseph would often talk with me about the distinction in indigenous languages. Verbs tended to be emphasized more than nouns. And in Western languages, nouns were emphasized more. And I thought this was really interesting because then he would say a noun is a person, place, or thing. And a verb is an action. It's what's happening between 2 things. So it was a shift from the thing, the object, to a relationship. So a more relational way of looking at things. But it also reminded me of the dehumanization. If we think of ourselves as nouns, we think of ourselves as objects. If we think of others as nouns, we think of them as objects. So the nounification of language also goes along with the dehumanization that can happen with that language. So I started to think about that connection as well. And then the three, I came up with the three ideas. I thought, well, let's break each dimension down into three core attributes. And I thought, well, it took a while to try and make it seem somewhat natural to end it with ing. Some of them may seem like neologisms or kind of made up words, but yeah, I was able to, for the most part, I think to shift it so that, it's kind of in honor of Joseph, but it's also just this subtle shift towards reanimating ourselves, to think of ourselves as something that's in process rather than something that's static.
Well, and if you think about just the energetic sense of, I need a self-care regimen, self-care, there's almost this heaviness to it, but I need a self-caring practice. Has a different ring to it.
It does, yeah, it does. And, I guess I'm in the self-care business, but I'm redefining it into caring for self business because self-care is such an overutilized thing. And sometimes these words, it's another thing I think with the noun idea of, we have these overused words that people conk you over the head with. So you burn out and your boss says, well, it seems like you're burned out. Take some time off, do some yoga, do some meditation, get yourself back to where we can burn you out again. So there's something just sort of dissatisfying about this whole idea of self-care as the solution to burnout. And we talk about this a lot in the book, and particularly in the last chapter in looking at institutional determinants of clinician health, looking at the ways that institutions shape for burnout, like Swenson and Schonefeld say in their Mayo Clinic book on burnout. They say that our current healthcare system is perfectly designed to create burnout. We take highly idealistic, passionate people and we run them through the ringer and they get burned out. So the system is really causing this. So that's the thing that, I wanted to shift some from this idea of self-care to caring for self, and also to add sort of this ongoing spiritual development aspect to it as well, to get away from this idea that we have to create a protocol to perfect our bodies or to perfect our diet. And that if we perfect those things, then we're, whatever, we're resilient. But it's not really true. A study by West found that doctors are more resilient than the average population, and yet they have higher rates of burnout. So just being resilient doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to burn out.
And this isn't a book so that people can get better and go back to work and burn out again, just like you said. So this is contributing to a wholeness of self that carries you through life in a different way. One of the concepts that I've really enjoyed learning about and thinking about over the years we've been working on this is transforming suffering as a tool of transformation rather than trying to eliminate suffering. Can you talk more about that?
I think that the Chenritzig story too in the beginning is a great narrative that captures this. So I'll tell that story, kind of a paraphrase of it. So this is the Buddha Chenritzig, also sometimes known as Avalokiteshvara in different traditions, sometimes male, sometimes female. But this Buddha Chenritzig in the Tibetan tradition vowed to eliminate all suffering in all sentient beings. And if uh, he was unable to accomplish that vow, may he explode into 1,000 pieces. So Chenritzig, worked and worked and worked and worked and looked, and there was more suffering than before he started on this process. And so he said, well, I vowed to explode into 1,000 pieces. I'll explode into 1,000 pieces. He's kind of burnt out at that point. And then another Buddha, Amitabha, witnessed this whole thing and said, wow, that was a very noble vow, but nobody can eliminate suffering. Suffering is part of the nature of reality. We can alleviate suffering, we can minimize suffering, but in this realm of existence, we can't eliminate suffering. So Amitabha went to Chenrezig and said, that was a great noble vow. Let's put you back together so you can keep up this good work. But let's give you 1,000 eyes so you can better see suffering. And let's give you 1,000 hands so you can better touch suffering. And so Chenrezig is often this figure that's has all these different arms, 1,000 arms and all these different heads and eyes. And the idea, if we think about this, what's the story tell us about burnout? One, it's, throw yourself into it because it's a noble vow, a noble goal. Two, you're going to burn out because it's bigger than you. When you burn out, hopefully there's someone else who's been there and done that and is able to help put you back together. And when you have that support, that kind of ritual elder or mentor support, you can actually become stronger from burning out. Chenrezig wouldn't have 1,000 arms and 1,000 eyes if he didn't burst into 1,000 pieces. If he had just kind of kept his, body intact and just kept slogging along, he wouldn't have been able to have those extra powers or extra, ways of caring. He wouldn't have been able to increase in his capability of caring if he didn't burn out. And so that's the idea of the story of the wounded healer. That's an ancient story of that people learn to be healers through their own wounds.
And becoming that wounded healer is becoming an empowered healer who then becomes a mentor to help others. And so this is where patients are cared for more, but so are your colleagues and the system itself.
Right. I think if we shift, this is something with the self-care resilience narrative of if providers cared for themselves enough, often on their own time, and if they developed resilience enough, let alone, they've already gone through how many years of professional education and juggled all these things and sacrificed all these things, but this narrative says, oh, but you're actually not resilient, even though you've accomplished all this already, So the narrative shifts, though, to if we say everybody in their career is going to burn out. So how can it'd be great if we could, make it so they don't burn out. But if you're a good, caring clinician, you're going to have an experience with a patient or client that's going to break your heart. If you're really doing good clinical work, that's going to happen. We don't want people who hold their hearts back to try to avoid getting broken. We want people to wade into it and get broken, but then we need a system that's going to be able to triage them and say, okay, every 5 years, like when I worked in New Zealand, every 5 years you got a sabbatical. And for a certain number of months, you could pursue whatever it was you were interested in. And I started thinking, what if we set that up of like every 5 years, you got a month where you went to a healer's retreat and you got to repair your wounds, you got to, strengthen yourself, you got to talk with other people. And what if, at a certain point when you got really burned out, something bad happened clinically, you would get extra support. And there was a system set up of like, hey, do you want weekly meetings with a mentor? Do you want to go to like a weekend retreat? Do we need to do a little bit more? Do we need to do like a week-long retreat? And to have these options sort of built in, and this is the idea of continuing human education that I think about too. We have continuing medical education or continuing professional education, and it's all about our minds. When we think back to that idea of dimensions, the 10 different dimensions or 7 different dimensions, if we think of the mind is one dimension, and we're kind of unidimensional in the way we educate and re-educate, ongoing continuing education for professionals. It's all about sitting down and reading something. It's not about developing the emotions. It's not about developing the body. It's not about developing the heart or the creativity or intuition or spirituality or interpersonal connection. It's unidimensional. It's flat about how do we just pour more information into you. And so our conception of what a professional is somebody that we pour information into and information goes out. It's kind of that thing, bullshit in, bullshit out. If you put information in, you're going to get information out. If you pour caring in, you're going to get caring out.
You
So
got it.
continuing human education, a practical thing we could do is to say, we've got so many hours of continuing professional education. Let's take 20% of that and say, you can pour more information in if you're like an information type of person, go to town, go to conferences, read journals. However, if you want to take a weekly yoga class, let's count, you could even come up with different things where an hour equals a half credit or something, or an hour equals an hour, however you want to do it. But, let's say you did 20 yoga classes and you got credit for 20 hours of continuing human education. We're not saying get rid of the intellectual or the protocols or the science.
Mhm.
We're just saying that we're more than a walking science dispenser. We're human beings, and patients are more than a walking science experiment who have some, chemical imbalance that needs some medication or drug to be dispensed when they push the right buttons. There's a lot more complexity there. And unfortunately, in our systems, because we're so time pressured, and because, hand in hand with time pressure, capitalism, and evidence-based medicine, all three of those have forced us into this kind of Procrustean reductionistic model where we forget that we're even human, let alone that patients are human. There's studies that say, how long does a doctor take to interrupt a patient? And it's on the order of, seconds, maybe a minute or two. And the earlier on in your career you are, the longer you let the patient talk. But they've done these studies that physicians interrupt people very quickly. And they've also done follow-up studies that if you just let people talk, they eventually tell you everything you need to know. And they usually don't talk forever. There's a few people who talk the whole session, but most people are going to try to tell you everything that's important, but it just takes them a little while. And they're not going to spit it out already in a reductionistic word, in an object or a noun. They're not going to say, I have hyperdyslipidemia 3, familial type or something. They're going to like weave it around, and sometimes in that journey of following them around, you find out what's really important to the person, and you might find out things that they wouldn't have told you that they didn't think were important. Other types of history that actually shape your diagnosis rather than honing into the problem in 30 seconds.
And only when you can be fully present, because you're fortified enough, can you be there to be that kind of a listener. And of course, have a system that allows you the time to do that. That might be
Yeah,
part of it.
right. There's the time aspect. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the threads that you brought up for me a minute ago was the idea that it's not just sending people off to read a book and fill their mind with academic, intellectual information. And that's one of the strengths of the Caring for Self and Others books, is that for each of those three words that you dig into, you're offering practices to the reader. Can you just describe one of those, or how those practices show up in your own life?
Sure. I'll think for a moment. Well, even just starting in the beginning with embodying, compared to a lot of approaches with the body in self-care. Self-care is, are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating good, healthy food? And are you exercising your body? In a way, that sounds kind of like a pet. Are you taking good care of your dog? Is your dog getting enough exercise? What are you feeding your dog? Are you giving your dog snacks between meals? And so, we do have this physiological body, but I didn't want to get into too much of this, this kind of moralistic, you should be doing this. Most people in healthcare and most people who've gone, most people in the world are going to know what they should do for their health, because most people are going to say, I shouldn't drink as much, I shouldn't smoke as much, I should, eat healthier. And you say, what's eat healthier? They'd be like, eat more vegetables and eat less, fatty food, and I should exercise. almost everybody knows that at this point in the 21st century. So, getting all moralistic and telling people to double down and triple down and quadruple down on those things doesn't work. And we know diets, have a really low outcome as far as maintaining weight loss. You can lose weight, but how do you maintain weight? So instead of saying a diet, which has the word die in it, we can say, well, how can we create a live it, something that you're going to enjoy and live and is going to nurture you. And we've got a quote from Stephen Cope, a yoga instructor and yoga scholar from Kripalu. And it's in that, I think in that first chapter, that talks about when you are present with your body, nurturing yourself becomes a source of joy. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping we can get to, is where caring for ourselves comes out of an abundance of joy and is something that's intrinsically and inherently rewarding, rather than caring for ourselves being like the however many patients you've got, then you've got one more patient at the end of the day or the end of the week, and that's you, and you've got to run yourself through your self-care protocol and do enough of this and do enough of that. But how can we shift from the self-care model to a caring for self model, where caring comes out as a natural, compassionate thing, just like you're walking down the street and you see a kid fall on their little toddler bike, and you're going to reach down and you're going to help them back up, and you're going to say, are you okay? And look, see if they have any bruises or injuries. And probably not. You'll just send them on their way. And you don't think, oh my God, I didn't have any energy. I can't help anybody else. I'm so burnt out. I've got so much compassion fatigue. I'm going to just pass this toddler by. No, you see the toddler and you're like, and then you feel better. You help the kid and you go and you talk to the mom later and say, hey, how was the kid? Was Toby okay after that fall? He looked okay, but just wanted to follow up. I saw him fall. But that comes out of this natural humanity. And in that sense, as our hearts circulate, our hearts give and receive. And so as we give to others in a caring sense, then we're receiving back as well. And it creates this loop and our hearts grow bigger. So, okay, so we asked about a specific one. So embodying, I just think about like a body scan, which is how do you, without changing, moralizing, trying to you do anything, how are you just present with going through your whole body from head to toe, all these different parts of your body, and taking time to care for yourself, to care enough to your body to listen to it. Because if you listen to your body will often tell you what it needs. But we're so busy, we're telling our body, you can't have that, you need to do this, you need to do that, like it's a dog or a little tiny kid. But instead, our body has this wisdom. And if we take time and do this body scan, then, we can learn something about ourselves, and that shapes what we're going to do next.
Thank you. So that makes me think about the body aspect. You and I both, during this adventure in creating a book together, have had our own health issues and caregiving issues. Plus, you are a psychiatrist at the Seattle VA, so you are a working clinician physician. How did the irony, we could say, of this need for self-care play into how you think it shaped how the book turned out?
That's a good question. And it's an irony only because of how messed up our system is. That our system, if we had that idea of like, the continuing human education, if you got a diagnosis of something serious, you could go into this pathway, some type of care pathway, clinician care pathway, where, maybe every 5 years you're entitled to this 1 month retreat. But, if you get diagnosed with cancer like I did, that maybe, and you're in your 2-year, 5-year cycle and you're only at 2 years, they're like, oh man, you get diagnosed with cancer, you are entitled to a month of retreat whenever you can handle it. And you're also entitled to this, that, and the other, these different types of caregivings and supports, instead of, work till you drop and then go on sick leave until you can come back and work till you drop again. So, okay, so that's the first thing, the irony, because I think of it too, the irony. I'm like, the irony of me writing a book on self-care or caring for self, and then I get this marathon of cancer, caring for self marathon. So, okay, so that's the first thing. But how has it shaped the book? I mean, it made me go back and look at all of these different practices and see like which of these are sustainable. And when I got diagnosed with cancer, I made it wasn't an Excel spreadsheet, but a spreadsheet on Word. Like every week, here are my different self-care activities, and I'm going to care for my body and my emotions and my mind. I'm going to keep track of what it is that I did, and I'm going to think about for next week what I'm going to do. And it's almost like I've turned myself into a patient, and I'm keeping a chart on myself. And there's pros and cons of that. And at a certain point, it just all broke down. And I was like, this is just too much. It's ridiculous. I feel too bad. I don't have the energy for this. And I'm on sick leave, and I've created a productivity mindset that I'm not getting things done. I'm behind on my charting, even though I don't have any patience, I turned myself into a patient. So there's pros and cons with that. We develop things that we want to develop. We need to be structured and logical about. However, there's aspects of human experience that structure and logic and protocols inhibit. So I developed a doing nothing practice. And I don't know, I think I mentioned that in the book. It's not one of the formal practices in this book of doing nothing. I suppose in chapter 11. Chapter 11 is on doing nothing, and there's only 10 chapters in the book. So, you read the 10 chapters and then you do nothing. So,
Oh, well, another thing that I really love about caring for self and others is how multi-dimensional spiritually it is, because you begin the book with the Chenrezig story, which is the Zen Buddhist flavor. And then there's Joseph Rael, beautiful painted arrow, and his practices and voice and just the influence of him that shows up. Um, do you want to talk just a little bit about the spirituality of the book? Because that's definitely not evidence-based in terms of
yes,
self-care.
yes. And yet, there's a historical precedent that medicine and healing have been intertwined with the spiritual, sometimes with the religious, but with the spiritual since the inception of healing. Healing was something that wasn't just a technical thing, it was also a spiritual thing. And one of my ideas, I've always got lots of book ideas. Before I even finish one book, I've got like, 3 or 4 other books. So I'd like to write something on re-spiritualizing medicine at some point. And I think this book, you kind of have that feeling of like one of the things that's rehumanizing is bringing in spirituality in ourselves and seeing that in others as well. And one of the aspects of caring for self comes out of the soul or the spirit. It comes out of this like a spiritual vow. And if we attend to it, there is a deep spirituality in any transformative experience. It's something that's beyond evidence, it's beyond a logical, linear perspective on things. And so I weave that in more and more ways. In Rehumanizing Medicine, I had a little section on mysticism and medicine, and I brought that in a little bit. And then one of the domains is spirituality. So that allowed me to bring that in. In the VA system with whole health, there's 8 different domains on this circle of health, and one of them is spirit and soul. And so in my VA practice too, I basically have permission to say if we look at these 8 different domains, 1/8 of what's going on has to do with spirit and soul. And this isn't religion. It could be religion, but what makes you feel vital? What makes you feel alive? What gives you a spark? What helps you connect to something larger than yourself? And all those things too would help with burnout, connecting to something larger than yourself, having a spark, all those different things can help you through the difficult times. So I think that's definitely true, that this is me sort of sneaking spirituality in a little way. Also working with Joseph Rael, I felt like that gave me permission to talk about spirituality, because spirit and healing is not separated in indigenous perspectives. In fact, if you take spirit out, you don't have healing. And that's, one of the complaints or criticisms when I was in New Zealand and went through like Maori cultural sensitivity training. One of the things they tell you is, from a Maori indigenous perspective, we don't split out the individual from the family, or the physical from the spiritual. We include all those things together. So if you're trying to split those things out, that's not culturally sensitive care.
Well, and that goes back to wholeness, doesn't it?
Mm.
Uh,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Well, as you're sitting there with paintings behind you, I wanted to lift up the fact that the book cover of Caring for Self and Others is your painting behind it. So you describe yourself as a physician, artist, poet, painter, uh, the wholeness of it, the creativity in that. How and when do you find time, or make time for your art, your artful living, I should say?
Right. It's been, painting, poetry, uh, journaling. So kind of three things that come to mind as far as reflection, creation type of activities. They've kind of come and gone. They're threads throughout my life, that sometimes they're more on the top and other times they're more on the bottom. One of the things I realized with cancer was, why do I live my life by saying, I really love painting, and then how is it that I haven't painted for a year? Well, I was busy here and I had that thing going on, and then I was working on this. I had to do a recertification, and I was developing these classes, and I was like, but I'm telling myself I love painting, so why haven't I painted? And that's one thing with the cancer, where I've tried to create time and space and priority in my life where I can do the things that I love first, rather than trying to take care of everything. Because as a professional, or even just living in the 21st century, we never get to the bottom of our email list, or get all of our mail completed, or all our bills out, or this. We're always living in process. And so, how do we bring these things up? Painting for me is about, it's creative, but there's also a spiritual element to it too, and a balancing element, where I'm working with some impulse within myself, and then the external is the paint and the colors. And I usually don't try to paint a thing. I think of myself as a non-representational artist, meaning I am not trying to paint an object, which actually I just thought of it, that this goes along with verbing rather than nouning, or being a noun. I'm not trying to create this thing that's fixed in the way that I'm perceiving it. I'm working with the reality of the canvas and the reality of the paint, and I take a spray bottle and I spray it, and I let things kind of, flow together. And one of the primary problems is knowing when to stop, so it doesn't turn into one uniform brown mess. When can you get the flow, and you see how things want to go, and how the colors want to interact with each other, and respect respect them, but then bring that to a kind of a boundary or a close. So to me, the process is very much of a process. It's very much of a flow, and seeing what happens. And I don't know, any other kind of follow-up questions on that?
Well, I guess one of the questions is how would you advise, or your readers, to carve out time for their caring for self practice?
It's tough, everybody's busy, everyone's short on time. And if you're a professional, that's the definition of a professional, somebody who's short on time. So I think, that idea of what do you really love, and how can you prioritize that before other things? Sometimes it can be getting up early. That's usually a bad plan. Like, often when I sit down to meditate, I'm like, oh man, meditation's so great. Why don't I meditate more? I'll get up 15 minutes early tomorrow and I'll meditate. And I'm like, well, there's a reason I get up at a certain time already, and it's because I feel tired if I get up earlier, you know. So um, it's kind of a creative, you got to just be creative and find the time and space for it. You might have to plan for it, but you don't want to over plan it. And then also too, trying to do what you love first. And what you love is going to be different. Everyone's going to love something different. And depending on what that is, it's, if you love taking a week-long hike in the woods, that's great. You can do that maybe once or twice a year. You'll be planning it a lot of the other time. If what you love, though, is their way, let's say you love taking a hike um, out in the woods by yourself. And so, but what could you do? What if you wake up early and you take a walk in your neighborhood? And I've thought about this idea of kind of nature with a small n versus nature with a capital N. And often people think, I want to get out into nature. And I've been trying to refocus that to, I'm in nature all the time. I wake up in my house and I'm in nature. There's wood, there's, colors, there's different types of material. There's glass that's made out of sand and silica. And when I go outside, there's a whole wilderness, urban wilderness of sparrows and juncos. And this morning we heard chickadees, and the spring flowers are coming up, the hyacinths. And if you walk, uh, there's different scents of flowers that you can tell different places. So I can have a, 10-minute or 15-minute nature walk, but I have to shift, to appreciate that this is actually nature. It's not just something that's in between me and where I'm trying to go. It's again bringing in so that would be another way of doing it, is how can you bring in the verbing into your life? Whatever it is that you love doing, how can you pay attention to that and do it even for, 5, 10, 15 minutes, but be in the flow of it and present, rather than it being something that's like a carrot. Then you're like, oh, if I get to, if I can get this done, then I get the carrot. And then if I can get, all my work done, I get a carrot. And then if I get, to vacation, I get a carrot. And then if I get to retirement, I get a carrot. How can you just um, figure out a way to eat the carrot?
Carroting.
Carroting, right? Right. Mm.
Well,
Yeah.
we're coming close on our time. Is there anything else that you'd like to be sure that readers pay attention to in the book, or what do you hope that they take away from the Caring for Self and Others book?
I guess, I think of it as a framework, and it's a framework that works for me. It's a framework that has a, thousands of year history of looking at the chakra system aspect of that and Ayurveda, and but it also is very similar to other Western traditions as well, the four humors, those types of models. And so it's a framework. If it doesn't work for you, make your own framework. If these exercises speak to you, do the ones that speak to you, and don't feel that if others don't speak to you, that's fine. Make up your own exercises. So they're really suggestions. There's things that, as I develop the exercises, they're either things that worked well for me, that make sense for me, and practices that I've done, or things that in working with patients and clients over the years, I've found are helpful for them in dealing with different situations in their lives. So, and then, yeah, don't turn this into, something that you're going to beat yourself up with. Hopefully you'll use it as a way to connect to your soul, connect to your passion, connect to what you love and what's important to you, and then use it as a stepping stone rather than a rule book.
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah,
Well, thank you
thank you.
for talking today. And Caring for Self and Others will debut on June 25th. And we hope that you share the book with your colleagues and friends. And it doesn't have to be just for healthcare workers either.
Sure.
Yeah,
Anyone
thank
can
you.
burn out. Hmm.
And heal.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah. Mhm.
Thanks.